Hi everyone, welcome to the Whiteleyverse with me, Connor Whiteley, for another daily story with a chapter from one of my novellas. Before I start today's chapter, please remember to like, comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content, and the engagement really helps the Whiteleyverse with the YouTube algorithm. Also, if you want to buy this book and any of my other fiction, then they're all available from all major ebook retailers. You can order the paperback and hardback copies from Amazon, your local bookstore and local library if you requested. Also, if you want the AI generated audiobook, then you can get it from selected audiobook platforms and library systems like Kobo, Spotify, Barnes & Noble, Google Play, Baker & Taylor, Biblioteca and Overdrive. Now, here's today's chapter. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did writing it.
Chapter 1. The 28th of July 2023. Maidstone, England. Private Eye Bettie English was so damn excited as she stood at the edge of the Kent Grammar School's anatomy lab, with a waist-height white science table filled with brilliant pig heads, pig eyes and other wonders for her to dissect as part of her post-mortem experience. She was standing around a large group of the tables, where 4 other people stood around her. The sterile white walls of the lab were covered in fascinating photos of the human body, decay and posters labeling different processes. It was so fascinating that Betty just loved it all. There was a large thin TV mounted to the wall, allowing Betty to see the large corpse in the middle of the lab, covered with a white cloth. It was so lifelike there was even blood dripping off the body. This experience was going to be great. Betty looked around at all the other groups of people gathered around their own tables. There were young medical students with their young, sweet faces looking excited. There were older medical professionals that were only here because of continued professional development requirements that they had to do for their career. They hardly looked too interested. They had probably done this hundreds of times before. And there were random members of the public like her. There was one group of university students that caught Betty's eye. The 5 students were all wearing white lab coats like everyone else, and they were laughing, smiling and taking photos. It was great seeing them so excited. Betty waved at a group of male medical students, with all of them having short brown hair, who she had bought their tickets for them. They were all students from poor broken homes, so Betty had bought their tickets for them so they didn't miss out. And she bought them the Premium Plus tickets, instead of the standard. They might as well have the extra specimens to dissect and enjoy and have a front row seat. That's disgusting, Graham said, heaving. Betty smiled at her sexy boyfriend Detective Graham Adams, as he just stared at the pig's head. He looked horrified and Betty just kissed him. He looked so wonderful, beautiful and attractive in his white lab coat that highlighted his fit body. Cheer up, Uncle Graham. Betty laughed at her nephew Sean, who looked made for lab work the way he rocked the white lab coat, and the whiteness of the coat perfectly matched his longish blonde hair with tasteful and artfully done pink highlights. Sean's boyfriend Harry looked a little more like Graham. He didn't look at all sure, and Betty had to admit, Harry had only come because of Sean, and because all 4 of them lived together they had really wanted to escape the house. As much as Betty loved her precious little babies, Harrison and Elizabeth, no one had prepared them for turning 10 months old. The little darlings weren't darlings anymore. They were like a hurricane of death and destruction, exploring every little nook and cranny, and Betty hadn't even realized her house was so big until she couldn't find her babies. Betty had to develop eyes in the back of her head just to keep up with the little ones. And they were suffering from massive separation anxiety. Betty could hardly pee without them crying or making a fuss, bless them. So Betty had sadly dropped them off at her mother's for the night. And Betty, Graham and the 2 boyfriends got a wonderful night of peace. Betty loved it when that happened. Good evening, Zoe said. Betty didn't care about so-called clinical procedure, or whatever the event organizers called it, as she went over to her best friend, senior forensic specialist Zoe Quill, who came to join their table. Betty was so glad she had been able to join them. Zoe might have only been doing this for continued professional development reasons, but Betty was just glad she was here. Granted, Betty knew that Zoe didn't want to do her day job on her Friday evening off, but Betty promised it would be a fun night. Something she knew she wouldn't be a liar about. "Auntie," Sean said, "look at the body." Betty looked up at the TV screen and shrugged. It was a special effects corpse with a white sheet over the top. It wasn't anything special. "I thought after death the blood started to congeal," Sean said. Betty nodded, and Zoe nodded even harder. "Yes, about 3 hours after death the blood has congealed so much, we can tell what position the victim died in." Betty bit her lip. "I get your point, Sean. If this body is really a special effects corpse, then why is it bleeding?" Graham looked like he was trying to frown but failing. "Can't we just go somewhere nice and not end up with a murder?" Betty cocked her head. "Go out somewhere nice? We're at a post-mortem experience, what did you expect?" "You want to check out the body, don't you?" Graham said, hoping she would say yes. "And then you want to start investigating." "Of course I do," Betty said, gesturing Zoe and Graham should follow her. Betty went straight over to the body in the middle of the lab, lifted up the white cloth and felt the man's cheek. They were warm to the touch. "Excuse me," a woman shouted. Betty went over to the tall woman in a long green lab coat, blue medical gloves and a blue surgical mask. "You cannot touch the body," the woman said. Betty took out her Private Eye ID, subtly showing it to the woman so it wouldn't alert other guests. And it also mentioned that she was the president of the British Private Eye Federation, a great organization that had more power than most governments of small countries, and smiled at the woman. "Bettie English," she said, "and I take it the body on that slab isn't meant to be warm and bleeding." The woman went over to the body, and made it look like she was doing final show preparations. She lifted the white cloth, and Betty knew she was forcing herself not to scream. Betty watched the woman's breathing become more and more rapid, and then the woman gestured her, Zoe and Graham, to follow her outside. Betty followed the woman into a very long blue corridor, and the woman frowned. "I'll be back in a minute." As soon as the woman walked away, Betty smiled because tonight just got so much more entertaining, because this was most certainly a murder. And she got to investigate it.
Welcome back everyone, it's me again, Connor Whiteley. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's story, because I flat out love writing, creating stories and sharing them with you. If you really enjoyed today's story, then please remember to like, comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content, and the engagement really helps the Whiteleyverse with the YouTube algorithms. And if you want to buy this short story or any of my other fiction, then they're available from all major ebook retailers, and you can get them from your local library if you requested, and you can order the paperback copies from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. Lastly, if you want to support the channel on a one-off basis, then you can now buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. Also, if you know anyone who would enjoy today's story, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the channel. So, thanks for watching the Whiteleyverse, and I'll see you again soon. Have a great day, everyone.